On Father's Day, my 8-year-old son stepped back from my hug. He wouldn't look at me. His hands stayed flat at his sides. Then he whispered it, careful, so his mother across the yard wouldn't hear. "Mommy says you stopped loving us." I had not missed a bedtime in 8 years. For 12 months, she had been teaching both our kids to flinch when I walked into a room. A little colder every other weekend, a little further away. She told the neighbors I had changed. She told her lawyer I was dangerous. And in 3 weeks, a judge would decide which house the kids came home to. The morning of that hearing, her attorney rose, buttoned his jacket, and opened his mouth to bury me. I stood up first. "Your Honor," I said. Before he finishes, "May I speak?" I'm Elias Kennedy, 33, a high school science teacher who has never once raised his voice at a student, and who had never, not one single night, missed putting my own children to bed, until the woman I married decided our family needed a villain, and chose me for the part. It started with something small. It always does. Let me tell you how a good marriage becomes a courtroom, and how the smallest voice in that courtroom said the thing that turned it all around. The summer before, on a Tuesday in June, Nicole told me she needed space. Not a fight. No slammed doors. She set it over the kitchen sink, her hands in the dishwater, her wedding ring on the windowsill, where she always set it while she washed. Sam was 7 then. Lily was 4, both of them upstairs asleep, trusting the world the way kids do when they've never had a reason not to. "I'm taking the kids to my mother's for a while," she said. Just a while. To think. I asked her what happened. I asked her what I did. She dried her hands and told me nothing happened. That was the first thing that didn't add up, and I let it go. Because I trusted her. 9 years I had trusted her. You don't tear down 9 years over one strange sentence at a sink. We married young. She was 22, I was 24, and we didn't have a dime. I graded lab reports at the kitchen table while she finished her nursing prerequisites. We split one car. When Sam was born, I drove to the hospital doing 40 in a snowstorm with my hazards on, and she laughed at me the whole way for being so careful. She used to love that about me. Careful, steady. The man who checked the locks twice and left the porch light on. I learned steady from my own dad. He worked 2 jobs and still made every game, sat in the same spot on the 3rd bleacher, never said much, just showed up so consistently that I never once had to wonder if he'd be there. He wasn't perfect, but he taught me the one thing I know how to do as a father, which is to keep showing up until showing up becomes a fact your kid can build a life on. I promised myself, the day Sam was born in that snowstorm, that my kids would never have to wonder. I didn't know that a promise like that could be turned into a weapon and pointed back at me. I didn't know a man could be present every single day and still be narrated into an absence. I want you to understand who we were before, because the woman I'm about to describe is not the woman I married. Or maybe she was, and I only saw the part she let me see. I've stopped being sure. That first week she was gone, I called every night at 7, the way we always did bedtime. Sam would tell me about his day. Lily would breathe into the phone and forget she was supposed to talk. Nicole was polite. Distant, but polite. By the 2nd week, the calls got shorter. By the 3rd, Sam started saying goodbye before I finished a sentence. "Okay, Dad, Mom needs the phone." I tried to talk to her, once, like adults, before the lawyers made talking impossible. I drove to Gale's on a Sunday and asked Nicole to sit with me on the porch for 10 minutes. I told her I didn't understand what happened, that I'd fix whatever I'd broken, that we could do counseling, that whatever this was, we could face it without turning the kids into a rope in a game of tug-of-war. She listened with her arms crossed. When I finished, she said, "It's not about fixing it, Elias. It's about protecting them. Protecting them. From me. From the man asking to go to counseling." I asked her, protecting them from what? And she looked at me for a long moment and didn't answer, because the honest answer, from a fear 30 years older than our marriage, wasn't one she could say out loud yet. Gale opened the front door then and said the kids needed their mother, and Nicole went inside, and the screen door clapped shut between us like a verdict. We set up a schedule through her sister's suggestion, every other weekend at my place, midweek dinners when she allowed them. A lawyer would call it a temporary parenting arrangement. I called it my whole life folded into 48 hours twice a month. The first weekend the kids came, they ran to me. Lily wrapped herself around my leg and wouldn't let go while I made pancakes. Sam wanted to build the Lego bridge we'd left half-finished on the counter. Trip came with them. Trip is a stuffed triceratops, gray-green, one horn chewed soft that Sam has slept with since he was 2. Trip goes where Sam goes. That first weekend, Trip sat at the breakfast table in his own chair, and Sam narrated his opinions on the pancakes. And I thought, okay, this is hard, but the kids are still the kids. We're going to be all right. I was wrong about the timeline of how a child gets taken from you. I thought it happened all at once, in a courtroom, with a gavel. It doesn't. It happens in inches. It happens so slowly that by the time you notice, you can't point to the day it started. The fourth weekend, Sam didn't run to me. He walked in behind Lily with his backpack on both shoulders and his eyes down, and when I knelt to hug him, he let me, the way you let a stranger's dog sniff your hand. Polite, braced. "You okay, buddy?" I asked. "I'm fine," he said. 7 years old, and he said it like a man closing a door. Trip did not come that weekend. When I asked, Sam said Trip had to stay at Mom's. When I asked why, he said, "Mommy says you might not give him back." I laughed because I thought he was joking. He wasn't. He watched my face to see how I'd take it. The way kids watch when they've been handed a line they don't fully understand and told it's true. That was the first coached sentence I ever heard come out of my son's mouth. It would not be the last. If you know that feeling, the moment your own child looks at you like you might be the danger, do me a favor and stay with me. Take a second to like this video and subscribe, because stories like this one get buried, and there are more fathers and mothers out there living it than you'd ever guess. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I read them. It helps to know I'm not talking into an empty room. Now let me get back to what happened next, because next is where it got deliberate. The weekends became a study in erosion. Sam started correcting me. Small things. I'd say, "Remember when we went to the lake?" And he'd say, "Mom says that wasn't fun for you. Mom says you wanted to leave the whole time." I remembered that day at the lake with total clarity. Sam catching his first sunfish, me holding the net, the two of us eating gas station sandwiches on the tailgate like it was a feast. That memory belonged to us, and someone had gone into it while I wasn't there and painted a new sky over it. Lily was younger, so hers came out simpler and somehow worse. She climbed into my lap one Saturday, warm and sleepy, and then she straightened up like she'd remembered a rule. "We're not supposed to love you too much," she told me. 4 years old. She said it kindly, the way she'd tell me the sky was blue, "'cause you might go away." I held her, and I did not cry, because if I cried, she would carry that home too, and it would become another exhibit. I said, "Baby, I am never going away. I am right here. I will always be right here." She nodded against my chest, and I could feel her deciding whether to believe me or believe the rule. That is the cruelest math I know. A parent teaching a child that love is dangerous, not with a fist, with a whisper, over and over until the whisper sounds like the child's own thoughts. I need to be careful here because I am a calm man and I want to stay one even now. Nicole was not a monster in a movie. She did not cackle. She was a tired woman who had convinced herself of a story, and once she believed it, everything she did to the kids made sense to her. That's what made it so hard to stop. She wasn't lying to hurt them. She thought she was protecting them. From me. From the version of me that only existed in her head. Somewhere in there, she stopped answering the phone at 7. I'd call, and it would ring out, and then a text would come an hour later. "Kids are busy. Try tomorrow." Tomorrow would be the same. I started writing everything down, not in some secret notebook, but right there in the co-parenting messages the arrangement required. Polite, dated, on the record. Missed our 7 p.m. call. Hope the kids are well. Available any time tonight. She'd read them. The little checkmark would turn. She never wrote back. One Sunday I dropped the kids off, and Nicole's neighbor, Ruth, an older woman who used to wave me over for tomatoes from her garden, saw me in the driveway and went inside. Just turned and went in. The next time, she wouldn't meet my eyes. I found out why at the hardware store, of all places, from a man whose kid played on Sam's old soccer team. "Hey," he said too casual, "you doing okay? After everything?" "After what?" I said. He got a look on his face like he'd stepped somewhere he shouldn't. "Nothing. Nicole mentioned things were bad, that that she felt unsafe." Unsafe. I put down the box of drywall screws I was holding because my hands wanted to grip something, and I did not want him to see that. I said, "That's not true." And I heard how it sounded. The exact thing a guilty man would say. That's the trap. When someone paints you as dangerous, every calm word out of your mouth becomes proof, and every ounce of anger becomes proof. And there is no expression a human face can make that a rumor won't twist. I drove home the long way. I sat in the driveway of the house that used to be full, and I looked at the dark upstairs windows where my kids used to sleep, and I let myself have exactly 2 minutes of it. Then I wiped my face and I went inside, and I did the thing I do when the ground moves. I made a plan. The next morning, I called a family lawyer named Ms. Corbett. She had gray hair, cut short, and a way of listening that made you feel like the clock had stopped just for you. I laid it out. The space, the move, the eroding weekends, the coached lines, the word unsafe circulating through my town like smoke. I expected her to hand me a sword. I wanted one by then. I wanted to march into court and expose Nicole, humiliate her, make everyone see. Ms. Corbett did not hand me a sword. "Mr. Kennedy," she said, "I'm going to tell you the hardest thing you'll hear from me, and I need you to hear it before we do anything else." She folded her hands. "You cannot win this the way you want to win it. If you fight her the way she's fighting you, if you badmouth her to the kids, if you build a case out of grievances, if you make those children a battlefield, you'll do to them exactly what she's doing. And a judge will see 2 parents playing tug of war with 2 kids, and nobody wins that, least of all Sam and Lily." "So what do I do?" I asked. "You do the opposite of what she's doing," she said. "She uses whispers. You use the record. She uses the kids as messengers. You never once put them in the middle. She tells a story. You let the truth be boring and consistent and provable, because boring and consistent is what holds up." She slid a form across the desk, and we asked the court to appoint a neutral, a guardian ad litem or a custody evaluator, a child psychologist whose only job is the kids. Not your lawyer, not hers, theirs. They interview everyone. They watch. They write a report. Judges lean on that report harder than anything you or I could say. I looked at the form, and if the neutral gets it wrong, then we're in trouble, she said honestly. But in my experience, kids are terrible liars, and coaching leaves fingerprints. A trained evaluator can tell the difference between a child's fear and a child's script. Your job between now and then is to be exactly who you already are. Steady, present, on time. Never say a bad word about their mother in front of them. Not once. Even when they repeat something cruel. Especially then. I signed the form. It felt like handing my children to strangers and asking them to see what I couldn't prove. But it was the only clean weapon in the room, so I took it. Here's what I want you to sit with for a second, before I tell you what the drawing showed. If you were me, if your kids came home flinching, and your whole town thought you were something you're not, and the law moved at the speed of paperwork, do you think you could have kept your mouth shut and trusted the slow, boring truth? I'm not sure most people could. I almost couldn't, because 2 weeks later, I nearly broke my own rule. The thing that had almost broke me came in a manila folder from a second-grade teacher. Sam's teacher was named Ms. Fenn, young, sharp, the kind of teacher who remembers which kid is allergic to what and who needs a minute before math. She called me for a conference, which surprised me because Nicole handled school things now, and I assumed I'd been quietly cut out of that too. "I called you specifically," Ms. Fenn said when I got to the little classroom with the little chairs, "because I've called Sam's mother twice about this, and I want to make sure both parents have the same information." She had Sam's folder open on the desk, reading levels, a spelling test with a gold star, a worksheet about the water cycle, and then she turned to a drawing, and she slid it across the tiny table to me, and my chest went tight in a way I have never felt before or since. The assignment had been simple. Draw your family. Sam had drawn the house. He'd drawn Nicole in the middle, big, holding Lily's hand, both of them smiling, yellow sun overhead. He'd drawn himself next to them, and off to the side, near the edge of the paper, separated by a thick line he'd pressed so hard the crayon tore the page, he'd drawn a small gray figure. No smile, no hands, just a gray outline of a man standing outside the line, outside the house, outside the sun. Under it, in careful second-grade letters, he had written, "Dad. He lives far." I live 11 minutes away. I have the drive memorized down to the 2 stop signs and the school zone. "He told me you moved to another state," Ms. Fenn said gently. "He said it very matter-of-factly. When I said I didn't think that was right, he got, anxious. He said his mom told him, and his mom knows the truth, and I shouldn't say she's wrong. She paused. Mr. Kennedy, I've been teaching 8 years. I'm not supposed to take sides, and I won't. But I've watched this child go from drawing his whole family in one bubble in September to drawing you outside the line in March. That's not a child processing a divorce. I've seen 100 kids process divorce. This is something else. I asked if I could keep the drawing. She made a copy for Sam's file and gave me the original. I have it still. I drove home with it flat on the passenger seat, like it might blow away, and I sat in my driveway again. And this is the part where I almost broke. Because I wanted to drive to Nicole's mother's house and put that drawing on the table and scream. I wanted to make her look at what she was doing to him. I wanted her mother, Gail, to see it too. Gail, who had never liked me, who had told Nicole at our wedding that men leave, that her own father left, and a smart woman keeps an exit. I wanted to walk in there and be the dangerous man they'd invented, just once, just enough to make them feel the size of what they'd done. I sat with the keys in my hand for a long time. Then I put them down, because Ms. Corbett's voice was in my head. You cannot win this the way you want to win it. And because if I storm that house, the only thing anyone would remember is that I stormed the house. The drawing wouldn't matter. The truth never matters as much as the last loud thing a man does. So I took a photo of the drawing, sent it to Ms. Corbett with a plain note, and I put the original in a drawer, and I went and stood in the doorway of Sam's empty room until my heart slowed down. That drawing became the thing I held on to, not as a weapon, as a compass. Every time I wanted to fight dirty, I looked at the gray man outside the line, and I remembered that the boy who drew it was not my enemy. He was the hostage, and you do not win a hostage back by shooting at the people holding him. Trip stopped coming entirely around then. I asked Sam, casually, over grilled cheese, where his triceratops was these days. Sam pushed his food around and didn't look up. Mommy says if I bring Trip here, you'll keep him, so he stays home now. Buddy, I would never keep Trip. Trip is yours. He goes where you go. I know, Sam said, and then quieter, testing it. But Mommy says. 2 words, but Mommy says. They had become the load-bearing wall of my son's entire world. Whatever came after them was true, and whatever I said, however gently, had to fit around them or be discarded. I didn't argue. Ms. Corbett had told me, never make him defend his mother. He'll choose her every time, because he lives with her, because he's 8, because choosing her is how an 8-year-old survives. So I just said, okay. Trip's got a good home there, but his chair's always here if he visits. Sam almost smiled. Almost. There was one midweek call near the end, before they got cut off entirely, that I keep like a stone in my pocket. Sam answered instead of Nicole, just for a second, before anyone took the phone. And in that second before the rules loaded, he said, Dad, guess what? I got the reading award and I looked for you at the assembly. And then a pause. A hand over the receiver, a muffled voice in the background. And when he came back, his own voice had changed, flattened, folded up small. I have to go. Mom needs the phone. Click. He looked for me at the assembly. Nobody had told me there was an assembly. I sat in my car in the dark holding a dead phone, and I let that be enough. He looked for me. Under everything they'd built, my boy still swept the crowd for his father's face. They could teach him the words. They hadn't reached the reflex. Then the letter started. Nicole hired a lawyer named Prentice, a man who wrote in bold type and exclamation points. The first letter informed me that Nicole would be seeking primary physical and legal custody, that my history made shared custody inappropriate, and that until the hearing, my parenting time might need to be reconsidered for the children's emotional safety. There was no history. There was a man who left the porch light on, but on paper, in bold type, with a lawyer's letterhead. A lie wears a suit and looks a lot like a fact. The second letter canceled a weekend. Sam, it claimed, had expressed anxiety about the visits, and Nicole was following her child's lead. My son's manufactured fear had become the reason I couldn't see my son. That's the machine. It feeds itself. First you make the child afraid of the father, then you point at the child's fear as proof the father is frightening. Every so often, the machine slipped, and I got a good hour, and then I watched them take even that away. Midway through, Nicole granted a rare Wednesday dinner, an extra one out of what I chose to read as guilt. I made spaghetti the way Sam liked it, noodles and sauce on separate sides of the plate because he didn't trust them to touch. And for 2 hours, it was ours again. Sam told me about a kid in his class who ate a whole crayon on a dare. Lily wore a plastic tiara through dinner and knighted the salt shaker. Nobody flinched. Nobody checked anyone's face for permission. My son laughed with his whole body the way he used to, and I burned the moment into memory because I'd learned to store these against the famine. I dropped them off glowing. I thought, maybe this is turning. Maybe the good hours will outnumber the whispers. Then the next handoff came, and Sam wouldn't look at me, worse than before, and at the door he leaned in and said low, "Mom asked if you said mean things about her at dinner." I told him I hadn't, which he knew. "I said no," Sam whispered, "but she kept asking. She asked like 4 times. So I said maybe you did a little, so she'd stop." He looked sick about it. 8 years old, and he'd learned to feed the machine small lies just to make the questioning stop. That's the part people don't understand about coaching. It isn't only what they tell the child. It's the debrief after every good hour. The gentle, relentless interrogation that teaches a kid that time with dad is a thing he'll have to answer for. An interview he can only pass by producing a little evidence against me. They didn't just poison the well, they put a checkpoint on the road back. Then came the move. Prentice's third letter announced that Nicole intended to relocate the children 2 hours south to a town near Gale for family support. 2 hours. Every other weekend visits with a 2-hour drive on each end become a thing you do in a car more than a home. New school, new friends, new church, a whole new life built 2 hours from mine, where the porch light I left on wouldn't reach, and where the only version of me the kids would hear about was the one being narrated to them daily. Relocation is the quiet nuclear option in these cases. You don't have to sever a father. You just have to move the child far enough that the severing happens on its own, by mileage, by exhaustion, by time. Ms. Corbett filed to block it that week, and for the first time the machine that had run so smoothly in Nicole's favor hit a piece of the system that wasn't listening to whispers. We had a status conference, a short hearing, temporary orders, the judge just getting her arms around the case. Prentice laid out the move like it was already decided, all stability and the children's primary attachment. Ms. Corbett said one thing, calm as still water. "Your Honor, my client has never missed his court-ordered time, has never once been late, and lives 11 minutes from the children's school. My client isn't asking the court to punish anyone. He's asking the court not to let one parent redraw the map before anyone neutral has looked at this family." The judge, the same judge who would later tell me to go be their father, looked over the filings for a while. Then she denied the relocation, temporarily. The children would stay in their school, in their town, until a full evaluation was complete. And she ordered that evaluation herself, appointing a neutral child psychologist to assess the family. She looked at both lawyers when she said it. "I've read a lot of these," she said. "I'd like to hear from someone who isn't being paid by either of you." It was the first time in a year that I walked out of a room and didn't feel like I was losing by inches. Nicole walked out ahead of me, fast, Gail's hand on her back, and she didn't look at me, and I understood that the neutral the judge just appointed was the one thing she couldn't script, which meant it was the one thing that scared her. The court sent us to mediation first, the way courts do, hoping 2 reasonable adults will spare everyone the hearing. We sat in a beige room with a mediator and a box of tissues nobody touched. Gail parked in the hallway outside like a general waiting on a report. I came ready to give up almost anything. I told the mediator I'd take the smaller share of time. I'd drive the whole distance both ways. I'd do holidays on her schedule. I only asked for one thing that I would not trade, that we both agree, in writing, to never speak badly about the other parent to the kids, and to bring them to family therapy. That was my whole ask. Not the house, not the money. Just stop teaching them to fear me and let someone help all of us. Nicole wouldn't sign it. She couldn't, really, because the entire structure of her case rested on the children's fear being real, and you can't agree to stop manufacturing a thing while insisting it isn't manufactured. The mediator, a patient woman who'd clearly seen it all, tried 3 different ways in. Each time, Nicole retreated to the same sentence. "I'm just protecting my kids. I'm following their lead." Her lead, the children she'd taught to be afraid, now cited as the authority on whether the fear was warranted. It's a perfect closed loop. It cannot be argued with, only exposed. At the end, the mediator set down her pen and said gently to both of us, "I don't think we're going to resolve this here." She looked at me a beat longer than at Nicole. I've thought about that look a lot. I think she was telling me, without breaking her neutrality, that she saw it too, and that she couldn't do anything about it, but somebody with more authority than a mediator might. We walked out to Gail in the hallway, who read Nicole's face, then read mine, and stood up straighter, satisfied. Impasse suited her. Impasse meant a fight, and Gail had been preparing for the men in her daughter's life to become fights since 1994. I want to stop here and ask you something, because we're coming up on the part where everything turned, and I've always wondered what people would have guessed. Nicole had the house, the kids, the neighbors, a lawyer in bold type, and a story the whole town already believed. I had a science teacher's salary, a drawing in a drawer, and a rule I refused to break. If you had to bet right now, before I tell you, what do you think turned it? Type your guess. Most people guess wrong, and the reason they guess wrong is the whole point of this story. Here's what I did with the canceled weekends. Nothing dramatic. I showed up anyway. Not at her door. Ms. Corbett was clear about that. I showed up on paper, in the record, calm and consistent. Every canceled visit, one message. "Sorry to miss this weekend. I'm available for a call anytime, and I'll be at Sam's game Saturday if that's easier." Every missed call, one message. I went to Sam's soccer games and stood at the far end of the field so I wouldn't cause a scene. And I clapped when he scored. And sometimes he'd glance over to check if I was there, and I made sure I always was. I signed him up for nothing and canceled nothing and complained to no one. I became the most boring, most present, most documentable father in the state of Ohio. It nearly killed me. Being patient while your kids slip away is a specific kind of drowning, where you're told that thrashing will only pull you under faster. So, you float. You float and you count weekends, and you leave the porch light on for children who aren't coming, because turning it off feels like agreeing with the lie. Some nights, I stood in the doorway of the room they used to share. Bunk beds. A glow-in-the-dark solar system I'd stuck to the ceiling when Sam turned 5. Half the planet's peeling now. I didn't go in. I just stood at the edge of it, the way Sam had learned to stand at the edge of a hug, and I let myself miss them for exactly as long as it took to remember why I was doing this the slow way. Then I turned off the hall light and went to bed and got up and taught teenagers about photosynthesis and did it all again. The science fair was the one that got past my guard. I teach science. It's the thing I know how to give my kids that nobody else in that family can. Sam had a school science fair coming, and months earlier, before the space, we'd already picked his project. A little volcano, the classic, because he'd watch me do the big demo for my students every October and beg to do his own. I had the baking soda. I had the red food coloring set aside in the cabinet. I'd been looking forward to it the way you look forward to the few things that are yours to give. The night of the fair, I drove to the school. I wasn't on the visitation calendar for it, but a science fair is public, a school event, and I was still this boy's father, and still, for that matter, a teacher at a school across town. I just wanted to see his project, stand in the back, give him a thumbs up. Sam's volcano was on a table in the gym. Someone had helped him build it. A good build, better than we'd have managed, store-bought cone, neat lettering. He stood beside it in a button-down shirt I'd never seen, and when he spotted me across the gym, he didn't wave. He looked at his mother, who stood a few feet away talking to another mom, and then he looked back at me, and he took one small step to put the volcano between us, like a wall. My son used my own volcano as a shield against me. I didn't go over. I couldn't put him through choosing in a crowded gym. I stood in the back by the door, and a couple of parents I knew from the neighborhood clocked me and drifted the other way. And one mother actually put her hand on her daughter's shoulder and steered her toward the far tables, as if I were weather coming in. I stayed 6 minutes. I watched my boy explain a chemical reaction I taught him to love, to a judge who wasn't me. And then I left before the ribbons, because a father lingering at the back of a gym while the room quietly relocates around him is a picture that helps no one. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and did the math I kept doing that year, the terrible arithmetic of alienation, that everything I was best at giving him was being handed to someone else, wearing my face, with the labels changed, the volcano, the lake, bedtime, the reading award. Piece by piece, they were reshooting my son's childhood with a different man in the dad role. And the cruelest part was that the man wasn't even real. He was just not you. an absence with my name on it. I could have made a scene at that science fair. Every cell in my body wanted to walk up and say, in front of everyone, I taught him that. That's mine. That's ours. I didn't. I drove home and I left the porch light on and I graded a stack of lab reports until my hands stopped wanting to close into fists. I taught the whole time this was happening. That surprised people who found out later. How did you stand in front of 30 teenagers every day while your own kids were being turned against you? The answer is that it was the only place the story hadn't reached. In my classroom, I wasn't the man Nicole invented. I was just Mr. Kennedy, who did the volcano demo every October and let you retake the test if you actually studied. There was a kid that spring, a junior I'll call D, a good kid whose parents were splitting mid-year, and his grades fell off a cliff. I kept him after class one day. Not to lecture, just to sit. He said, "My mom says my dad doesn't care. My dad says my mom's crazy. I don't know who to believe, so I just stopped believing both of them." He looked at me with the specific exhaustion of a teenager doing his parents' emotional labor. It's easier to not have a dad than to keep getting my hopes up. I nearly came apart at my own desk because I was hearing my son's future in a 16-year-old's voice. That's what alienation grows into if nobody stops it. Not a child who hates you, a teenager who protects himself by deciding you were never worth the risk. I told Dee the truest thing I knew. Your dad showing up boring and steady over and over, even when it's awkward, even when you're cold to him. That's not nothing. That's the whole thing. Give it time before you close the door. I was talking to Dee. I was talking to Sam. I was talking to myself, out loud, in an empty classroom, trying to believe it. Karen from the front office, who'd worked at that school for 20 years, started leaving a coffee on my desk some mornings without a word, that's all. A coffee, no note. It was the kindest thing anyone did for me that whole year, and she never once made me explain. Gail met me at a pickup once, that spring, and said the quiet part out loud. Nicole had started sending her mother to the handoffs, which meant I'd pull up, and Gail would walk the kids to the curb like a warden delivering visitation. That day, Lily dropped her water bottle in the yard and ran back for it. And for 3 seconds, I stood alone on the sidewalk with Gail, who looked at me the way you look at a stain you can't get out. "You know," she said, pleasant as anything, "you had your chance to be their father. Now you get to be their visitor. I'd make my peace with that if I were you." I said, "They have a father, Gail. He's standing right here." She smiled. "For now." Then she called Lily along and buckled my daughter into a car seat in a car I didn't own and drove my children back to a house I wasn't allowed to enter. I stood on the sidewalk until they turned the corner. A visitor. She'd said it like a verdict, and part of me, the tired part, the part that hadn't slept, wondered if she was right. She wasn't. But grief and doubt are cousins, and they visit together, and the only thing that kept the doubt from moving in was a stubbornness I didn't know I had until I needed it. So you see, Lily turned 5 that April, and the birthday is the day I almost stopped believing the slow way could work. The party was at Gail's. I got a text, not a call, telling me I could stop by for an hour between 2 and 3. Not the whole party. An hour on the edge of it, like a delivery window. I brought her a present she'd been asking for since Christmas, a stuffed narwhal with a sparkly horn wrapped badly because I'd wrapped it myself at midnight, alone. When I got there, the yard was full. Nicole's family, a few neighbors, balloons on the fence, a bounce house I hadn't been asked to chip in for and would gladly have paid for twice. Lily saw me from across the grass, and for one perfect second she lit up the way she used to, and she took 2 running steps toward me. And then she stopped. She looked back at her mother, and Nicole, without raising her voice, without doing anything a stranger would have flagged, gave a small shake of her head. Just a little no. And my daughter's whole body changed. She slowed to a walk. She came over and accepted the present with a polite "thank you," and let me hug her for exactly as long as the rule allowed. And then she went back to the bounce house, and I stood at the edge of a party for my own child holding an empty spot where a 5-year-old used to fit. Sam wouldn't come near me at all. He watched me from the porch steps with Gail's hand on his shoulder. A neighbor I half knew came over, the way people do, to say something nice and make it worse. "It's so good of you to come," she said, meaning it, patting my arm. "Nicole told us how hard you're trying, considering. She's really the bigger person about all this. Considering." There it was again. That little word doing so much work. The whole invented history of me packed into 3 syllables and handed around a birthday party like cake. I stayed my hour. I sang happy birthday from the back of the crowd. I watched my daughter blow out 5 candles surrounded by people who had all been told, gently, sadly, that her father was the reason her family broke. And when my hour was up, Nicole walked me to the gate. And at the gate, quiet, so only I could hear, she said the thing I have never forgotten. "They believe me, Elias," she said. Not cruel, almost gentle. That's all that matters now. They believe me. She wasn't gloating. That's what undid me. She said it like a woman describing the weather. A simple fact about the world, settled, done. I drove home with a wrapped narwhal I'd handed off and an emptiness I could have measured in pounds. And I called the one person who could talk me off the ledge. Pete has been my best friend since our freshman dorm, a plumber now, married, 3 kids, the least dramatic man alive. I told him about the gate, the little no, the birthday I attended like a stranger. I told him I was thinking about doing something loud, showing up, making a scene, making them all see. Pete was quiet for a second. Then he said, "Eli, let me ask you one thing. 10 years from now, when Sam's 18 and he finally gets to decide for himself who's telling the truth, what do you want him to find when he looks back?" He let that sit. You want him to find a dad who lost it at a birthday party, or a dad who just kept showing up, calm, every single time, no matter what they said about him, because one of those men he can come home to, the other one proves them right. I didn't say anything. "Keep leaving the porch light on," Pete said. "It's the most powerful thing you're doing, and it doesn't feel like anything. Just keep doing it." So I did. I kept doing the thing that felt like nothing. The court appointed the neutral in April. Her name was Dr. Merrill. She was a child psychologist, court appointed, and she came to my apartment for the home visit with a notebook and no expression I could read. She looked at the bunk beds I kept made. She looked at the drawings on my fridge, the ones from before, when Sam still drew me inside the line. She asked me to walk her through a normal weekend, and I did. Pancakes, the Lego bridge, the game, bath, 2 books, lights out, the porch light on. She asked what I'd do if Sam said something cruel to me, something his mother had planted. "I'd tell him I love him," I said, "and I'd let it go. Even if it's a lie about you." "Especially then," I said. "He's 8. He can't hold his mother's anger and my defense at the same time. If I make him carry my side, I'm just the second person using him. I won't be that." Dr. Merrill wrote something down. I couldn't tell if it helped me or hurt me. That's the terror of the neutral. You can't perform for them because performing is exactly what they're trained to catch. All you can do is be who you actually are and pray that who you actually are is enough. Dr. Merrill interviewed me alone in her office too, a week after the home visit. 2 hours in a soft chair while a woman with a legal pad asked me to explain my own marriage falling apart, and watched how I did it. I understood the test by then. She wasn't only listening to my answers, she was listening for whether I'd use her the way everyone else was using the kids, as one more channel to run my case through. So when she asked what I thought of Nicole, I told the truth, which happened to be the only strategy left that I could stand to live with. "I think she's scared," I said. "I think her dad left when she was 9 and her mother spent 30 years telling her that's what men do. I think she looked at a rough year in our marriage and saw a prophecy instead of a rough year. I don't think she's evil. I think she's wrong, and I think what she's doing to the kids is going to hurt them for a long time. And both of those are true at once." Dr. Merrill wrote for a while. Then she asked the question I think the whole evaluation turned on. "If I recommend that the children stay primarily with their mother," she said, "what will you do?" "I'll take it," I said. "I'll take whatever keeps them from being torn in half. If that's every other weekend from the back of a gym for the next 10 years, I'll be at that gym every time, and I won't say one word against her, and I'll wait for them to be old enough to see me for themselves." My voice caught, and I let it. "I'm not trying to win them away from their mother. They love her. That's good. I just don't want them to have to stop loving me to do it. That's the only thing I'm fighting for. Not custody. Permission. Permission for my kids to love us both." She set down her pen. For just a second, the unreadable face moved. She didn't say anything. But she looked at me the way you look at someone when the thing they said matched the thing you'd already seen. And I understood, walking out, that the neutral I'd been so afraid of was the first person in a year who had looked at my whole family and seen it clearly. Before the suspension, Dr. Merrill scheduled an observed session, an hour with me and the kids at a family visitation center, her watching from a chair in the corner with that unreadable face. I have replayed that hour 1,000 times. The room had a rug shaped like a road, a bin of blocks, a dollhouse missing a roof. Sam and Lily came in ahead of a center worker, and both of them stopped at the door and looked at Dr. Merrill first, not at me. Sam had clearly been prepped. He walked to the far end of the rug and sat with his back half-turned and said, "Hi," to the wall. I didn't chase him. Ms. Corbett had drilled that into me. Don't perform closeness. Don't stage a reunion for the evaluator. Just be the dad you are and let the kids meet you where they can. So I sat down on the road rug and started building the block bridge we'd always built, out loud, to nobody. "I don't know," I said, to a block. "This tower needs an engineer. I only know one good one." Lily broke first. 4-year-olds can't hold a script. The script is too big for their hands. She drifted over to watch, and then she was helping. And then she was in my lap, directing bridge construction like a tiny foreman. And for a few minutes, she forgot every rule she'd been given and just built a bridge with her dad. Sam watched us over his shoulder. I could see him doing the math. Is this allowed? Is Dr. Merrill going to tell Mom? What happens to me if I go over there? He came halfway. He sat 2 feet away, close enough to be part of it, far enough to deny it later. And he handed me blocks without looking at me, which is an 8-year-old's version of a white flag. At one point, the bridge collapsed, and Lily shrieked laughing, and Sam laughed too. A real one, surprised out of him. And then his face closed as fast as it opened, because laughing at Dad's joke had not been on the list. "Trip would have caught it," I said lightly, about the bridge. Sam went still. "Trip's at home," he said, then softer, the crack showing. "He asks about you." And then catching it, correcting, retreating. "I mean, whatever Mom says." He looked at Dr. Merrill fast to see if he was in trouble. That was the whole hour. A little girl who forgot to be afraid, and a little boy fighting a war inside his own chest between the dad in front of him and the story he'd been handed. I left not knowing if Dr. Merrill had seen a frightened child or a coached one, because from the outside, for those few minutes when Sam's face closed, they can look the same. I had to trust that a trained eye could tell laughter cut short from fear and a slip about a stuffed dinosaur from a symptom. I found out Nicole's real reasons the way you find out most true things, sideways from someone who didn't mean to tell you. Her sister Diane, the one who'd suggested the schedule, the one decent bridge left between our families, met me for coffee she'd asked for in a text that just said, "I'm sorry. Can we talk?" She stirred her drink for a while before she said anything. "She's not doing this because she hates you," Diane said finally. "I need you to know that, even though it doesn't make it better. Our dad left when Nick was 9. Just didn't come back one Sunday. And our mom spent 30 years telling us that's what men do. They smile, they leave, they forget you. Nick married you because you were the opposite of that. And then you two hit a bad year, and she got scared, and Mom got in her ear, and somewhere in there she decided the only way to survive you leaving was to leave first and take everything with her and make sure the kids never loved you enough to be destroyed when you went." Diane's eyes filled. "She's not protecting them from you. She's protecting them from a man who left 30 years ago. You just have his job." I sat with that. It's the closest I ever came to understanding Nicole, and it did make it sadder, and it did not make it okay. Because understanding why someone is drowning your children doesn't obligate you to hand them the water. A reason is not a permission. I could grieve for the 9-year-old girl whose father didn't come back on a Sunday, and I could still fight, cleanly, patiently, to make sure my own kids never learned that lesson from the wrong side. Diane told me one more thing before she left. She told Sam the evaluator is on your side, that Dr. Merrill is a trick. She's telling him if he says the wrong thing, he'll get sent to live with you and never see her again. Diane's hand shook around her cup. He's 8. Elias? He thinks the truth is the thing that gets him taken from his mom, so he's gonna lie to protect her. And it's gonna look like he's scared of you. That was the moment the ground dropped out from under me. Worse than the drawing, worse than the whisper on Father's Day, because I finally understood the shape of the trap. It wasn't just that my kids had been taught to fear me. It was that they'd been taught the truth was the enemy. And a neutral evaluator asking an honest child honest questions was about to get a rehearsed script delivered by a terrified boy who believed that honesty would cost him his mother. I called Ms. Corbett from the car. I could barely get the words out. "She's going to win," I said. "He'll tell Dr. Merrill he's scared of me. He'll believe it's the only way to keep his mom. There's no proof against that. There's no document that shows what he really feels." Ms. Corbett was quiet for a moment. Then she said the thing I held on to for the next 2 weeks. "Elias, trained evaluators don't just listen to what a child says. They listen to how. A coached child and a frightened child sound completely different. The coached child recites. The frightened child remembers. Dr. Merrill has done this 200 times. Trust the process." Then came Father's Day, and I finally saw, in my son's body, everything they'd built. I still had that weekend, before the suspension. Nicole dropped them off Sunday morning, Father's Day, and stood by her car at the edge of the yard with her arms crossed, watching, the way you'd supervise a handoff of something fragile you didn't trust the other person to hold. Lily came first, and Lily still ran because 4 is younger than the machine is fast. She had a card she'd made at preschool, glitter glue, and a handprint turkey that had nothing to do with Father's Day, and she didn't care, and neither did I. "It's for you," she announced. "The turkey is you." I told her it was the best turkey I'd ever received. "It's on my fridge. It will be on my fridge when I'm 80. Then Sam. I opened my arms the way I had 10,000 times. And my son, my boy, who used to launch himself at me from the top of the stairs, who I'd caught 1,000 times and would have caught 1,000 more, stepped back. One small step. He kept his eyes down and his hands flat at his sides, and he leaned away from his own father's hug like it might cost him something. I knelt down. I kept my voice easy. "Hey, bud, you don't have to hug me. That's okay. I'm just really happy to see you." He glanced across the yard at his mother. Then he leaned in close, not to hug me, but to tell me something. Quiet, careful, so she wouldn't hear it float across the grass. "Mommy says you stopped loving us," he whispered. Then he pulled back to watch my face the way he'd learned to watch, to see if he'd said it right, to see what a father does when his 8-year-old hands him that. "I want you to know what I did because it's the hardest thing I've ever done, and it doesn't look like anything." I didn't correct him. I didn't say, "That's not true. Your mother is lying. Don't you know how much I love you?" I didn't put my grief on his small shoulders on top of everything else he was already carrying. I just smiled at my son and I said, "Well, I never will. Not ever. Even on the days you're not sure. Especially those days." And I let him decide what to do with that. He didn't hug me, but he took my hand for a second. 3 fingers the way he had as a baby, before he remembered he wasn't supposed to, and let go. 3 fingers. On a Father's Day, when I'd been told I no longer loved them, my son held 3 of my fingers for 3 seconds, and it was the best gift anyone gave me that whole terrible year. A small hand telling the truth its owner had been forbidden to say. Nicole called them back before lunch, said something had come up. It hadn't. She just couldn't leave them with me long enough for the whispers to wear thin. I stood in the yard after they drove off, and I made myself a promise. Not to fight dirty. Not to win, just to still be standing in this exact spot, loving them exactly this much, on every Father's Day it took, until they were old enough to walk back across that grass on their own. I wanted to trust the process, but then the process did the cruelest thing yet. 10 days before the hearing, Prentice filed for an emergency order. He attached a statement. Sam had told his mother in tears that he didn't feel safe on visits, that he had nightmares before my weekends. Nicole requested that all my parenting time be suspended until the hearing for the children's protection, and a judge looking at a sworn statement about a crying child and unable in 10 minutes to know it was a house of cards, granted it temporarily. So for the last 2 weeks before the hearing that would decide everything, I was not allowed to see my children at all. I want to be honest with you about those 2 weeks because I've built this whole story around staying calm. And I don't want you to think calm means unbroken. It doesn't. Calm is a choice you make over and over with shaking hands. I did not sleep much. I taught my classes, and I don't remember teaching them. I drove past Sam's school once at recess and made myself keep driving because a suspended father parked outside an elementary school is a headline waiting to happen, and I would not hand them that. I left the porch light on every night, and every night it lit up an empty walk. On what would have been my weekend, I made pancakes out of habit, one plate, and I couldn't eat them. And I stood at the counter where I'd been standing the night Nicole told me she needed space, and I put my head down on my arms, and for the first time since the day Sam was born, I let myself come apart. 2 minutes, I told myself. You get 2 minutes. I took 10. Then I washed the plate, and I put it away. And I got out the drawing of the gray man outside the line, and I looked at it until the shaking stopped, and I said out loud to my empty kitchen, I am not going to be who they say I am. I am going to be who my kids need, even if they never find out I was it. That was the bottom. Everything after that goes up. I brought the emergency order to Ms. Corbett the same afternoon it came through. I expected her to be worried. Instead, she read it twice, set it down, and got very still, which I would learn is what she does instead of getting loud. They overreached, she said. They suspended my time with my kids. Yes, on the strength of a statement that your 8-year-old had nightmares before your visits. Visits at which, by their own prior filings, this child built Lego bridges and ate pancakes and went to bed at 8. She tapped the page. Elias, a suspension order granted on a coached child's fear is not a defeat. It's the pattern doing the one thing patterns do. It repeats. And now it's repeated in writing, in a courthouse, under oath, where a judge and a neutral evaluator can see the machine work in real time. She picked up her pen. We're not going to fight this order. We're going to let it stand for 2 weeks, and then we're going to walk into that hearing and show the court exactly how it was manufactured. I'm filing to expedite, and I'm calling Dr. Merrill. Her report's done. Sealed. Neither side has seen it. That's how you know it's clean. She looked at me over her glasses. Whatever's in it, it wasn't written to please you or her. That's the whole point of a neutral. I've read a lot of these. I'll tell you what I always tell my clients, and then I'll never say it again, because hope is expensive in this job. She paused. Coaching is loud on paper and quiet in a room. In the filings, your kids sound terrified. In an evaluator's office, coached kids fall apart in a very specific way. If Dr. Merrill saw what I think she saw, that report is going to matter more than anything Prentice can shout. I held on to that for 2 weeks the way you hold a railing on ice. The allies came out of the quiet places. That's the thing nobody tells you. When someone builds a story that you're the villain, most people go silent, but a few, the ones who actually watched, quietly refused to sign it. Diane called Ms. Corbett herself. She offered to testify about the coaching, about our mother, about the little shake of the head at the birthday, about the day she heard Nicole tell Sam that Dr. Merrill was a trick. She's my sister, Diane told me on the phone, and her voice cracked. And I love her, and she is wrong, and those are my niece and nephew, and I'm not going to watch this happen and say nothing. Loving her doesn't mean lying for her. Ms. Fenn, the teacher, provided written observations through the proper channel. Dated notes from a professional's ordinary work. The arc of a boy who drew his whole family in one bubble in September and drew his father outside a torn line by March. Not a weapon anyone built. A record anyone could have kept because it was just the truth of a classroom, written down as it happened. And Dr. Merrill finished her evaluation. Interviews with both of us. Observed sessions with the kids and each parent. Interviews with the children alone, in her office with no parent in the room. The one place, maybe the only place in Sam's whole life right then, where "but mommy says" couldn't reach him. I didn't know what he told her there. I wasn't allowed to. I just knew that somewhere in a sealed report was a record of my son, alone with a kind stranger, being asked honest questions. And I had to trust that the boy I'd left the porch light on for was still in there under the script. The 2 weeks of the suspension nearly finished me anyway. The worst night came about halfway through. Sam's actual birthday fell inside the blackout. He turned 8, and I couldn't see him, couldn't call him, couldn't hand him the telescope I'd bought and hidden in my closet since March. The good one, the one we'd talked about aiming at Saturn from the backyard. I sat on my kitchen floor at 11 at night with a wrapped telescope and a card I couldn't deliver, and I got as close to breaking my rule as I ever came. I had my keys in my hand. I had the address memorized. I could see the whole scene. Me on Gail's lawn on my son's birthday, demanding to give my boy his present, and I could see exactly how it would read in an affidavit the next morning. Father shows up unannounced, agitated, at night. I would have handed them the last brick they needed. I called Pete instead. It was almost midnight. He answered on the second ring like he'd been waiting, because that's what he does. He didn't tell me to calm down. He just said, "Put the keys on the counter and tell me about the telescope." So I did. I told him about Saturn and the rings you can actually see with a decent scope, and how Sam had gasped at a picture of it in a library book when he was 6, and somewhere in the telling, my hands unclenched. "Wrap it back up," Pete said. "Put it in the closet. He's going to look through it with you. Not tonight. But he is." I put the keys on the counter. I kept the telescope. It's in Sam's room now. We've seen Saturn twice. That's the thing. Nobody warns you about doing the right thing, the slow way. It asks the most of you exactly when you have the least left, on the kitchen floor, at midnight, with a present you can't give, and every reason in the world to burn it all down. The strength isn't in never wanting to. It's in putting the keys on the counter. The night before the hearing, I didn't sleep, and I stopped pretending I would. I sat at the kitchen table with the gray man drawing and a legal pad Ms. Corbett had given me, just in case the judge lets you speak. I tried to write something, a speech, a list of everything Nicole had done in order, with dates, a case for the prosecution. I got 3 lines in and I stopped because I could hear how it sounded. It sounded like a man who'd lost and wanted the last word. So I tore off the page, and I sat there with the blank pad, and I asked myself the only question that mattered. Not how do I win, not how do I make them see what she did, just if I get 60 seconds in that room and my kids someday read the transcript, what do I want them to find their father said? I didn't write anything after that. I already knew. I got to the courthouse at 8. In the one suit I owned, the porch light still on at home over an empty walk because I hadn't been able to make myself turn it off, even for a night. Ms. Corbett met me on the steps and straightened my collar like my mother would have. "Remember," she said, "she's going to be aggressive. Prentice is going to paint you before you've said a word. You do not react. You do not roll your eyes. You do not sigh. A calm father in a room full of accusations is the most persuasive thing a judge sees all day. Let the noise be theirs." Inside, the courtroom was smaller than I'd imagined and colder. Nicole was already there. She didn't look like a villain. She looked like a woman who hadn't slept either, thinner than I remembered, her hands knotted in her lap. For 1 second, our eyes met across that room, and I saw something I hadn't expected. Not triumph, fear. She was as scared as I was. She just believed a different lie about why. Gail sat behind her, spine straight, chin up, certain as a church. She caught me looking and lifted her eyebrows a fraction, as if to say, "Still here? Still a visitor?" Prentice shook out his cuffs and arranged his folders and radiated the confidence of a man holding a story a whole town already believed. The kids weren't there. Kids don't come to these. Somewhere across town on a school morning, Sam was learning fractions, and Lily was gluing cotton balls to construction paper, and neither of them knew that in a beige room downtown, 2 adults and a judge were about to decide the shape of the rest of their childhood. The judge came in. We rose. We sat. She read the file for a while in silence that stretched until I could hear the clock. Then she looked up, and she looked tired in the specific way of someone who has watched a lot of families take each other apart, and she nodded at Prentice. "Counsel, this is your motion. Let's hear it." Prentice stood, buttoned his jacket, and began to bury me. Prentice built the man he wanted the judge to see, brick by brick. He talked for a long time. He said I'd become emotionally volatile after the separation. He said the children exhibited fear responses before visits. He said Sam had nightmares, that Lily had regressed, that Nicole had done nothing but follow her children's lead and protect their sense of safety. He used the word safety the way you'd use a crowbar. He asked the court to grant primary physical and legal custody to Nicole and to make my suspension permanent, with supervised visits if and when the children indicate readiness. If and when. My children's readiness to see me, defined by the woman who'd spent a year teaching them to be afraid. I sat still. I did not sigh. I did not shake my head. Ms. Corbett had told me the truth. A calm father in a storm of accusations is the loudest thing in the room, if he can hold it. So I held it. I looked at the table, and I breathed, and I let Prentice paint. and every brick he laid landed on my chest like a stone. Across the aisle, Nicole watched her lawyer describe a man who never existed, and she nodded, small, like she was confirming a weather report. She believed it. That was the worst part. She wasn't performing. She'd told the story so many times it had become her memory. When Prentice reached his finish, "And so, Your Honor, for the emotional safety of these children, we ask—" I stood up. "Your Honor," I said. "Before he finishes, may I speak?" Prentice stopped. The judge looked at me over the file, and something crossed her face. Surprise, maybe, that the volatile man had risen quietly and asked permission like a student. Ms. Corbett's hand touched my sleeve. A question. I gave the smallest nod. I knew what I was doing. I'd decided the night before, at a kitchen table with a blank pad. "Mr. Kennedy," the judge said, "this is your counsel's job, but I'll hear a brief statement. Keep it brief." I didn't have notes. I didn't need them. "I'm not going to stand here and tell you what my wife did," I said. My voice held. "Her lawyer told you what I did. I could spend my minutes telling you the opposite, and you'd have two parents pointing at each other, and you'd be no closer to the only thing in this room that matters." I looked at the judge, not at Nicole. My kids are 8 and 5. They didn't choose any of this, and I've watched for a year both sides of a family teach my son that loving me is dangerous. I won't be the third adult who uses him. I'm not going to make him testify to save me. I'm not going to make him choose. I put my hand flat on the table to keep it steady. "So I'm going to ask you for something strange for a father in my chair. I'm not asking you to punish anyone. I'm asking you to listen to the one person in this whole case who doesn't want anything. Not the house, not to win, not to be right. The evaluator this court appointed, she spent time with my kids that neither lawyer got to script. Whatever she found, I'll live with. If she says my children are genuinely afraid of me, then I'll spend the rest of my life earning back their trust from the outside, however long it takes. And I'll do it without a single bad word about their mother, because they only get one. But before you make me a visitor in my children's lives." Gail's word, and I watched it land. "Please, hear the neutral. That's all. Hear the person with nothing to gain." I sat down. My heart was going like a hammer. The room had gone very quiet. The judge looked at me for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then she said, "Ms. Corbett, call your evaluator." Dr. Merrill took the stand with the same unreadable calm she'd worn in my kitchen. She'd interviewed everyone. She'd observed both parents. She'd met the children alone, and she had written a report neither side had been allowed to see, which meant that for the first time in a year, a version of my family was about to be described by someone who hadn't been coached, hadn't been bitter, hadn't been afraid. Ms. Corbett kept it simple. "Doctor, in your professional opinion, are these children afraid of their father?" "No," Dr. Merrill said. Prentice was on his feet. "Objection!" "She's the court's own evaluator counsel," the judge said. "Sit down. I appointed her to answer exactly this." "Continue, doctor." Dr. Merrill opened her folder. "There's a difference," she said to the room, "between a frightened child and a coached child, and it's my job to know it. A frightened child remembers. The details shift, the way real memory shifts. They add things, they get confused. The fear is specific and physical and their own. A coached child recites. The phrasing is adult. It's identical across tellings, word for word, because it isn't a memory. It's a line." She turned a page. "Both of these children recite." She laid it out the way you'd lay out a case that builds itself. She'd asked Sam what scared him about visits. He'd said, and she read it flat from her notes, "Daddy stopped loving us, and he might not give us back." An 8-year-old does not construct that sentence. It has 2 clauses and a legal anxiety. She'd asked him to describe a scary night. He described one, his father screaming, a specific Tuesday, and when she gently asked what the screaming was about, what room they were in, what he did after, the story fell apart in his hands because there was nothing under it to hold. There'd been no such night. I hadn't raised my voice in that house in 9 years. He was reciting a night that never happened, in phrasing that matched, word for word, a sentence his mother had put in 3 separate filings. "Objection," Prentice said again, quieter. "Overruled." Then Dr. Merrill introduced the drawings. Ms. Fenn's file, dated, professional. A boy who drew his whole family in one bubble in September, and by March drew his father as a gray figure standing outside a line pressed so hard the crayon tore the page. Dad. He lives far. Dr. Merrill held it up, and I watched the judge look at it for a long, long moment. He told me his father moved to another state, Dr. Merrill said. His father lives 11 minutes away and has never missed a soccer game the child let himself look for. This isn't distance, it's instruction. Nicole made a sound, small, a breath. And then Dr. Merrill described the observed session, the one I'd left not knowing if it helped. She'd seen it exactly. A 4-year-old who forgot the rules and built a bridge in her father's lap. An 8-year-old who came halfway, who handed his father blocks without looking, who laughed once at a joke and then shut it off, as if laughing were against the rules. She'd watched him check her face after every warm moment, seeking permission to love a parent, which is not a symptom of abuse. It's a symptom of a child who's been told that his own affection is a betrayal. And there's the fear that gave it away, Dr. Merrill went on. Not fear of his father. In my interviews, Sam showed a very particular anxiety that telling the truth would get him taken from his mother. He'd been told the evaluation was a trick. He believed that if he said the wrong thing to me, he'd be sent to live with his dad and never see his mom again. Think about what that means. A child genuinely afraid of a parent wants that parent kept away. This child was terrified that honesty would cost him his mother. That's not a symptom of an abusive father. That's the fingerprint of a child who's been recruited into protecting the very story that's hurting him. She let that land. The pressure in that boy is enormous. He is 8, and he has been holding a secret for a year, and the secret is that he loves his dad. Prentice did not object that time. She set down the folder. There's one more thing, she said, and it's the reason my recommendation is what it is. The room held its breath. In my private interview, I asked Sam a question I ask a lot of children in these cases. I said, if you could tell your dad one thing, and I promise no one, not me, not your mom, not anyone, would ever know you said it, what would you tell him? Dr. Merrill looked for the first time, not at the lawyers, but at me. He didn't recite, she said. He thought about it for almost a minute, and then he said, very quietly, I'd tell him I lied. He never stopped. I have taught myself to hold a lot. I did not hold that. I put my hand over my mouth, and I bent forward, and I made no sound, and a year of it came out of me at once in a beige courtroom, and I did not care who saw. He never stopped. He knew. Under every but mommy says, under the gray crayon man, under the flinch on Father's Day, my son had known the truth the whole time and had been carrying it alone, because they'd taught him that the truth was the thing that would get him taken away. The silence in that room had weight, and into it, Nicole broke. He's twisting it, she said, standing to the judge, to the room, her voice climbing. He's making Sam say things. Ma'am, the judge started. You don't understand what it's like, Nicole said, and now it poured out of her, fast, the way a thing pours when the container finally cracks. I did what I had to do. I protected them. Men leave. My father left. His father was going to leave. I could feel it, and I wasn't going to let them love him and then get destroyed when he walked out like they all do. She caught herself too late, her own motive lying on the courtroom floor for everyone to see. Prentice had his hand up trying to stop her, and she didn't even see it. They believe me, she said, quieter now, almost to herself, the same words she'd said at the gate on Lily's birthday, and they didn't sound like power anymore. They sounded like a woman realizing what she'd built. They believe me. That's all that... She stopped. She looked at me, really looked, for the first time in a year, and I watched her see it. That I hadn't left. That I was never going to have left. That she'd taken a fear from 30 years ago, a father who didn't come back on a Sunday, and she'd wrapped it around a man who checked the locks twice and left the porch light on, and she'd made our children pay a debt that was never theirs and never mine. She sat down. She put her face in her hands. Gail reached for her shoulder, straight-backed, certain, and for once Nicole didn't lean into it. The judge let the room settle. Then she spoke, and she was not cruel, and she was not soft. I've heard enough, she said. The emergency suspension is vacated, effective today. Both parents will share joint legal custody. Physical custody will follow a phased schedule of reunification. beginning immediately and expanding over the coming months, supervised and reviewed by Dr. Merrill. She looked at Nicole and her voice cooled. Ms. Kennedy, what this court heard today is alienating behavior, and I want to be very clear about what happens next, because your children's futures depend on you hearing it. If this pattern continues, if these children are taught again to fear a parent who has given this court no reason for that fear, this arrangement will be revisited and not in your favor. Reunification therapy is not optional for all three of you. Do you understand? Yes, Nicole whispered. One more thing, the judge added, glancing at Prentice's relocation filing where it sat, now dead on the table. The request to move these children 2 hours away is denied. They stay in their school, in their town, 11 minutes from their father. This family needs to be knit back together, and you don't do that with a 2-hour drive between the pieces. The judge looked at me last. Mr. Kennedy, she said, you asked me to hear the person with nothing to gain. That was the right thing to ask. She almost smiled, and didn't. Go be their father. I don't remember standing. I remember Ms. Corbett's hand on my back, steady. The way you steady someone who's been holding his breath for a year and just remembered he's allowed to exhale. I remember Gail on her feet saying something sharp to Prentice that he waved off because there was nothing left to argue. And I remember Nicole not looking at her mother, not looking at her lawyer, looking down at her own hands like she'd never seen them before, like a person waking up in a house they don't remember building, wondering how the walls got so high, and whether it's too late to take them down. I walked out of that courthouse into ordinary daylight, a Tuesday, people getting coffee, and I sat on a bench outside for a while because my legs had opinions about walking. Then I drove home. And for the first time in 300 and some days, I pulled into my driveway in the afternoon, and I turned off the porch light because I didn't need it to keep a promise anymore. My kids were coming home. I could leave it on for the reason people leave lights on, just to say, someone's here. Come in. Reunification isn't a movie hug. It's slow, and it's supervised, and it's awkward, and it is the best work I've ever done. The first Saturday back, Sam came to the door with his shoulders up around his ears, braced for a father who might be angry that he'd lied. I got down to his level, the way I had on Father's Day when he stepped away from me, and I said the only thing that mattered. You didn't do anything wrong, buddy. You were a kid in a hard spot, and you did the best you could, and I never once stopped, not for a second. His face crumpled, and this time he didn't step back. He stepped in. Trip came that weekend. Sam carried him to the door and set him in his old chair at the breakfast table without a word, and neither of us made a thing of it, because some things you just let come home quietly. We do the therapy, all three of us, the way the judge ordered. Nicole comes. She's not a redeemed woman in a bow. She's a person doing the hard, unglamorous work of unlearning a fear older than our marriage. And some weeks she does it well, and some weeks she doesn't. But she stopped. The whispering stopped. When Sam mentions me now, she doesn't correct him. That's not forgiveness yet. It's something more useful. It's a mother letting her kids keep their father. Gail, I keep at arm's length. Some doors you leave shut for the kids' sake, and I don't apologize for it. A visitor, she'd called me. I'm at every game now in the middle of the bleachers, and I let that be my answer. A few weeks in, Sam brought me a drawing from school. New assignment, same as the old one. Draw your family. He'd drawn the house and his mom and Lily and himself, and this time he'd drawn me inside the line, holding his hand, both of us with the wide crayon smiles kids give the people they've decided are safe. No gray, no torn page. Under it, he'd written, Dad, he lives close. 11 minutes. He'd always lived 11 minutes away, but it took a neutral stranger, a torn drawing, and my son finding the courage to say 7 true words in a locked room to close that distance on paper. If there's someone in your life quietly showing up for a kid who's been taught to keep them at arm's length, a parent, a grandparent, anyone leaving a porch light on for a child who isn't coming, tell them to keep going. And if you've ever been that kid or that parent, I hope you find your way back to the line. I read every comment. Tell me you made it. Here's the only wisdom I've got. After the worst year of my life, you cannot argue a child out of a lie they've been taught to survive on. You can only be so steadily, boringly, unmistakably there that one day the truth becomes safer than the story. Last Father's Day, my son stepped back from my hug and told me I'd stopped loving him. This morning, he climbed into my bed at 6:30, Trip under his arm, and told me the porch light woke him up through the window, and could I please leave it on again tonight? I told him I always would.